And there, welcome back. Sunrise continues. This time we're looking at the state of the nation. Recently, there was a press release by the Department of State Security talking about plots for interim government and calling it a misguided political actors. That will be our focus this time. And we have joining us in the studio here Professor Oke Ikechukwu, the Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Kunle Adegoke, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Principal Partner Kunle Adegoke & Co., who joins us via Zoom. Mr. Adegoke, okay, he's yet to come in. But let's start with you, Professor Ikechukwu. This, first of all, how would you say, after the elections, Nigeria, the state of the nation has been?
No, I think the elections, despite issues being raised, gives clear evidence of progressive political maturity of the more Nigerians. Elections held, more people came out voluntarily. Then after the elections, even those who were not satisfied with the outcome did not riot. Those they voted for who lost or who won did not create any untidy scene, which is not to say everybody was satisfied. But what happens in a democracy, you recognize free choice, and that means you're ready to accept the outcome. So what I see is progressive gains, whereas there are episodic issues, which in themselves can never be avoided in any environment. So all things considered, events leading up to the election itself, we had assurances from INEC. Those assurances were met in substantial measure. But the truth of the matter also is that I have a substantial number of Nigerians who were not satisfied. Did they kill anybody? No. Did they go on the streets? No. Are they ready to follow the process? This is the second leg of the game, namely the recognition, because no matter how you feel about it, no matter the recorded and clear cases where people felt the judiciary didn't do very well in the past, one truth we can't run away from is that the judiciary is part of the democratic process in a modern state. And so people have said we are going to court. So on the whole, clearly there were lapses. Obvious, conspicuous lapses, videos showing such things. Unfortunately, we are hearing about arrests. A nation does not develop because it gets anything perfect. As a child is walking, is stumbling. We are seeing it. But when a child is perpetually stumbling, we'll say this child is retarded. And then we get worried. So let's see what follows through from this. We've seen declarations of results at all levels, local government, state assembly, governors, House of Reps, senators, and the presidency. The judiciary will be very busy in the next couple of weeks and probably months.
It's interesting the way you put it, progressive gains from in the area of democracy and all that. But what role how do you think the judiciary has played prior to the elections, during the elections, and you've even mentioned in there what they're going to do after the elections? How would you rate the judiciary? You've talked about security, the fact that there are some arrests that have been made already. You've talked about administrative side, how INEC has managed its entire system, so to speak, promises made, some met, some not met. But what do you think the judiciary is likely to do in the face of all of this?
The first point is to note that, when we speak of government, mentally we're thinking of the executive arm, which is incorrect, which is wrong. It's the other arm of government in addition to the judiciary. Now, the judiciary as an institution, in the recent past, we've had judgments which a lot of people felt could or shouldn't have gone the way it did. But the truth of the matter is that whereas some of the details may not be available to us, perception is a critical success factor in public administration. On the whole, the judiciary as an institution is different from the decisions and actions of specific members of the judiciary. But when those members of the judiciary are people who stand at a certain level, it colors the general perception of the judiciary. And that's where the problem seems to be coming from. But as it is, panel tribunals have been set up. What we expect is that already, given the murky waters in which we stand after the elections, it is hoped that the judiciary will give some credibility, some further hope to Nigerians by turning out judgments that, based on the evidence before it, will also correspond with what a lot of people feel goes in line with natural justice, equity, and good conscience. So, judiciary is on trial. INEC has been on trial for the last more than 1 year. People expect, I, for instance, didn't expect most of what I saw in the elections. INEC is not looking very good right now, and in many cases justifiably. But that's a matter that the courts will now finally determine that, okay, we've seen all of it, we've had all of it, these are the facts before us, this decision will come with. Already some people are making preemptive submissions. Oh, since in case A and B in the past, the judiciary took this kind of position, we're not sure we can feel confident that it will be fair now. We'll let it happen, we'll see it happen. Nations develop that way. And those who want change must develop the mindset of, a revolution doesn't occur because you're excited. Cuba, the strong man in Cuba, what's his name?
Fidel Castro.
Castro. In the end, he went on until his entire people were wiped out. There were none of them left. It is resilience that leads to change and not excitement. There's something I believe in. There's something I want to pursue. I'm pursuing it with all means available to me and without apologies. It is that kind of concept. And the youths also have gained. You recall there was a young boy, I really say boy because of his age, who committed suicide because of the elections. His candidate didn't win. And they say, oh, see what INEC has done to him. No, he was killed by Nigeria. Poor parenting, poor community life, collapsed values, wrong mentors, etc. Even at the religious level, I don't think anybody where we're growing up will have thought of that. So what we have is general collapse around us. But you can see the progressive cohesion of the youths. Imagine that this election took place immediately after NSAS. There will have been riots all over this country, for and against. But it's not happening. So you are reining in more and more people onto the platform of rationality. They're also beginning to see the extent, how deep-rooted or deep-seated the issues they're trying to deal with. Look, there are people who don't want this. We want it. But if we jump on the street and they jump, there'll be no nation at all to talk about. So those are the kind of games, subtle, but those are the kind of games I'm talking about. And that's why resilience will be a stronger component going forward than, rabble-rousing.
Indeed, Dr. Okeke-Chukwu, it's very interesting that, I beg your pardon, Professor.
Your own. just call Okeke.
It is interesting how you paint this as part of the stops in our journey to nation building, and how all of this forms the tapestry of what eventually makes our country Nigeria. It's interesting you also say that when a child stumbles too much, they might begin to wonder if that child is retarded. I'll come back and ask you if you think that we're stumbling too much, and maybe that will provide Nigerians the answers. But let me quickly bring in the other guest, which was introduced, our other guest who was introduced earlier, Mr. Kunle Adegoke. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria and also principal partner, Kunle Adegoke & Co. He joins us via Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Adegoke. I'm sure that you have been taking a look and trying to perhaps decompress all that has happened before, during, and after the elections, particularly the presidential and governorship elections, and perhaps distilling into nuggets what lessons that we can learn and how it is that we should handle the very delicate situation that we found ourselves in. People who are discontent, pockets of protests here and there, and also this very, very interesting statement released by the Department for State Services about a plot for interim government, which they say is by misguided political actors. What are your thoughts on what has happened so far and this statement released by the DSS?
Thank you very much. I believe that the developments that we have had in the past few weeks are part of a democratic process. However, there is a limit to which certain things can be counted as part of a democratic process. And when you have an election, all over the world, no election has been rated to be 100% good. There are people that will not be satisfied. There are those that will be joyous as a result of the process favoring their candidates or for some other reasons. However, where the electoral process has been concluded and a winner has emerged, a loser or losers have emerged, the next phase, as recognized by the Constitution of Nigeria, is that the battlefield will now move from the polling units, from the wards now to the courts, where the judiciary will have the opportunity to look at the merits and demerits of the cases being presented. Right now, we have had judicial panels already in place. I mean, election petition tribunals already in place all over Nigeria, in all states, and also at the federal level. The tribunal is already ready at the Court of Appeal to sit with respect to the presidential election petition. And we have quite a number, I think probably up to about 5 now, have been filed as petitions to determine the actual winner of the presidential election. At this particular stage, I will commend the parties for adopting what is regarded as constitutional, as democratic, that is, moving their grievances to the law courts. No nation will survive in a state of autarky, in a state of lawlessness, in a state of crisis. And the best we can do in the circumstance is now to go to court for anybody who is not satisfied with the outcome of the election. Now the parties have moved to the tribunals. The next thing is to allow the process to take its course. Yes, their lawyers should be ready to do their work. I'm involved in a number of petitions. And what I've been working on is to ensure that, yes, we are properly ready and prepared for all issues as may be coming up for the tribunals to determine. But a situation where protests are being organized, rallies are being organized after the election, we may see it as part of a democratic process, but no, it is going beyond what is recognized. Once you have filed your petitions in courts, once you have moved your battlefield to the tribunal, then allow the judicial process to take its course. Prepare your lawyers, prepare your cases, arm them very well so that they will be able to persuade the tribunal to get judgment in your favor. It will not be part of a democratic process to now say that we'll continue protesting until the inauguration or threatening fire and brimstone that the inauguration of the new president will not hold. No, that will not be part of the democratic process. I listened to Dati Baba Ahmed on channels, I think about a day or two ago, where he was threatening fire and brimstone, threatening to bring down the nation. No, that is not the hallmark of a democratic individual. He was involved in an election in 2011 when he went to the Senate, and the opponent did not threaten fire and brimstone, did not threaten to bring the senatorial district or the nation into jeopardy as a result of the decision of the electorate, which the opposition to his candidature believed that it actually won. It moved to the tribunal. And at the end of the day, after about 10 months, it was decided that the opposition actually won the election. Dati Baba Ahmed had to vacate the seat. And if that should be the case, I believe that not only PDP, Labour Party, AA Action Alliance, and about 2 other parties have gone to the tribunal now. They have done the best. They have done what is commendable. Yes, you put the judiciary on its toes.
Mr. Adegoke, some people will say that you know, while you might argue that it's not a part of the democratic process. In other words, maybe protests are not a part of elections. But some people will say it is part of the rights recognized within a democracy, a right to freedom of speech, right to be able to express oneself freely, right of association, right to be able to protest if you feel, disenchanted by whatever it is that is happening. Are these rights all of a sudden abridged as a result of, it being involved in an electoral process?
That is not the case. What we are saying here is that where you are considering rights as guaranteed by the law, no right is absolute. Where my right begins is where your own ends. I cannot threaten that I will continue protesting on the streets, organizing rallies, which will be infringing on the economic rights of others, which will equally be threatening the democratic rights of other people. By the time you are saying you are organizing rallies, you are organizing protests and what have you, there is no way you will not inhibit free flow of traffic. By the time you are threatening institutions converging on their premises, maybe National Assembly or wherever, you are making it impossible for such institutions to freely and quietly do their duties, you'll be infringing on the rights of other Nigerians, assuming in a situation where there is a margin of appreciation, where there is no room for sufficient remedies, or there is no room for avenues by which you can seek remedies to your grievances, and you're organizing rallies, you're organizing protests, is a different thing. But where you have gone to court, yes, you have the right to protest, but you cannot have a right to protest in perpetuity until a date you choose that, okay, until they listen to you. I've heard people saying that until maybe a particular candidate is sworn in as president, they will not terminate the protest. I do not think that will form part of a democratic process. We just have to be reasonable here. Assuming the supporters of other candidates too are organizing protests, and we have probably millions of people on the roads on a daily basis, how do you think the nation is going to move forward? How do you think we are going to prosper? How do you think that the system is going to work in your favor, in my favor, in favor of everybody? And that is why I'm saying that yes, I'm an advocate of the fundamental rights. I'm an advocate of democratic rights, because the two may not necessarily coincide. Yes, because when you look at it, yes, fundamental rights are guaranteed under the Constitution. They are not absolute too. The Constitution does not make them to be absolute and unbreachable in any circumstance.
Right.
Where it will be infringing the laws of the land in certain respects, then the law will be as well.
All right, Mr. Adegoke, let me take this to Professor Okechukwu now. And I mean, my focus would follow from what Mr. Adegoke said, trying to strike a balance between protecting democracy and not stifling free speech, not stifling dissenting voices, because that's actually a major part of democracy. And this is for Professor Okechukwu in our Abuja studio. So what kind of posturing then do you expect, or should we be expecting to have from both parties for Professor Okechukwu? So I'm talking about the government, which is in charge of the institutions, maybe the winners in the election as well. What kind of posturing do you expect from them? What kind of messaging do you expect from them? And for those who feel aggrieved too, what kind of posturing messaging do you expect from them, such that we strike that delicate balance between protecting democracy and not stifling free speech, not stifling protests, lawful protests, or peaceful protests, as the case may be? Prof.
Yeah, in all social action, the actors must be informed. You speak of free speech, correct, but there's also the law against libel. So your right to speak freely does not allow you to defame me. Then protests, yes, peaceful protests to make a point, but let's disaggregate the variables here and see whether there are justifications. Then I'll move on to the role of the players. The case some people have against the outcome of some of the elections, the cases are already in court. They have lawyers duly, retained, very competent legal luminaries. They've prepared their cases, they've made the submissions in court. The processes have been, analyzed for commencement and the rest of it. Then probably all of us in the studio here support a particular candidate, and then we go to picket the court. Rioting, not rioting actually, making a protest that, no, we've come to make this point. My question will then be, why did you hire lawyers? And as the senior advocate said, if every other person comes to the same court, what will happen? It will be chaos. But so let's get the point clear. Number one, group discipline must be restored. When you go to picket the court, you say you keep protesting. First, you're trying to overawe and intimidate the judiciary. That's the truth of the matter. You're saying that the courts should not sit at all, but they should listen to you and take a decision based on that. Will not take us anywhere. That's the point that needs to be made about that. So that you see that the right to protest is okay. You can use any kind of medium, but to surround an institution of state that has a task to carry out, in itself, that's even trespass. There are places, you have not Eagle Square now, the one near the Hilton in Abuja, where you can, that's where you actually allow, yes, the Unity Fountain. So discipline must be restored. So these people should rein in their followers, rein in their members, explain to them if they've not done so already that, look, this matter is in court. Lawyers are there. And remember that all the people protesting, they didn't come from one location. What you should then do is, are there no people managing the various locations? Assuming they came from 3 or 4 local governments, are there no coordinators there? You go and talk with them. That's how party ideology, that's how loyalty gets entrenched. So I'm not in support of the protest at all. It's a distraction. It's not going to lead to greater cohesion. It's also not a very good way of carrying out political education, because personal discretion is being allowed to stand forth as a point of view on the national platform. And so if, as some are protesting, let's take maybe the 4 front runners or the 5 cases in court or thereabouts. Each group, the president-elect, his team are protesting, the PDP protesting, Labour Party protesting, NPP, what would you have? So let's just conduct ourselves with some dignity. The riots to stop. The leaders of the parties should call them in. The Adegoke said Dati Ahmed made a comment about the protest not ending. If he made that comment, I consider it unfortunate.
Yeah.
Discipline is part of leadership. The correct signaling is also important. And I don't think anybody should ask people
indeed,
and let's give the judiciary the respect.
Instructive, Prof, and we hope that you know, the relevant authorities will take heed to your admonition in that regard. You just talked about the judiciary. Let me take this to Mr. Adegoke. If you look at the last paragraph of that statement issued by the DSS, it says stakeholders, notably judicial authorities, media, and the civil society, are enjoined to be watchful and cautious to avoid being used as instruments to subvert peace and stability of the nation. Let's pick up on the judiciary first of all. You know, commentators have reminded us that during the June 12, 1993 election, that the judiciary was some sort of pawn to the extent that contrary ex parte orders were issued, one for the counting to be stopped and the other for the counting to be continued, and at the end of the day, the elections were annulled. So do you see that as a possibility if we consider this statement by the DSS?
Right. I have heard about the claim or the allegation that certain individuals or political parties are trying to move the courts to restrain the inauguration from being held. That would be an irresponsible order for any court to make. It's just like somebody getting an order from a court, or maybe let us say the executive today saying that no court in the land should sit anymore. How would the constitutionalism concepts or doctrine be protected? How are we going to be regarded as a responsible nation where the legislature, for instance, says that the executive should stop working from maybe a particular date or for a particular purpose? It is not sensible. It is the court of law that has the power truly to check other arms of government in terms of interpreting the Constitution. But transitioning from one particular government to another is not an issue on which the government, the court, will have the jurisdiction to grant an ex parte order to say, yes, somebody has been elected, then it should not be sworn in. The Constitution has guaranteed the rule, the right, the process to follow when a particular party or group of people feel somewhat, unhappy with the outcome of an election. It is possible that some people might approach maybe a court in Zungeru, in very remote, yes, we've seen lawyers and political actors, political leaders approaching courts in very remote areas and obtaining injunctive orders recklessly issued by some members of the bench. It is quite disheartening and quite disappointing that a judge will grant a political order, a political directive that he knows cannot even be enforced. How are we now going to guarantee that there wouldn't be a vacuum where a court says the inauguration should not hold on May 29? Are we saying that President Muhammadu Buhari will continue being president? Who is going to take over? Is it
so if it's a possibility then, Mr. Adegoke, how do we guard against it?
Yes, right now I believe that the NJC, the National Judicial Council, is taking, because meetings were recently held, and I believe that the NJC is taking the appropriate steps to make sure that their lordships in the various high courts and other courts are educated. I mean educated in terms of making them to be conscious, to be wary of such developments in their courts, where such applications are made, that you don't grant this kind of order no matter what. The appropriate thing to say to such parties is that go and put the other parties on notice. Bring your case for me to hear both sides, maybe on a particular day to be given thereafter. And where the issue of jurisdiction is thrown up, then you must be able to look into the Constitution and know that this is not the appropriate thing. More so that petitions are already pending before the various tribunals, where the Federal High Court says that a particular candidate who has been declared winner of an election should not be sworn in. And eventually the tribunal is hearing the same case. Is it not going to amount to conflicts between the two? Because it's not going to be an abuse of court process.
Indeed, and we hope that we do not.
I believe it is fundamental at this stage.
And we hope that we do not get into that quagmire. Yes. We hope that the judiciary would seriously guard against it. Let's take the third beat of the last paragraph of that statement. And I'm bringing this to you, Prof. The DSS also urges that civil society should be weary of becoming instruments to subvert the peace. And we've seen time and again how members of the civil society, gather together to protest against one form of issue or the other, particularly at the National Assembly. And you mentioned the Unity Fountain. We've seen that in this instance, where there are some who are for the candidate who has emerged president-elect and those who are against. Should we begin to interrogate civil society and perhaps separate the wheat from the chaff, those who are political jobbers and those who are of legitimate causes?
Yeah, well, yes, but actually part of our problem revolves around the fact that some civil society organizations misread their legitimacy. You may recall that civil society organizations, quite a number of them, had very strong views about what's going on in the Northeast, about human rights and so many other things. I'm a bandit, I come with my team, I wipe out a village, men, women, and children. I keep moving from one place to another. And the issue on the table only for you is the human rights of the bandit. The soldier, you've trained a soldier, you spent, he's a brigadier, a colonel, the nation has invested X amount. This is high caliber human capital. He gets killed. It's not important. But bandits, armed robbers with no history and no future. So you see that civil society organizations, many of them are very responsible. If you look at the monitoring of elections consistently, and some interventions they are making, you can't remove the fact that they are a necessary part of our fabric for development. But the truth is that the concept of national interest is not understood by many of them. That's different from asking everybody to lie for your nation. Go to the US, information, civil society, management of public communications is always guided by national interest. That's why the CNN you and I watch is not the CNN you watch in the US if you go there. That's why you don't have shortwave radio, which can traverse so many areas. National interest communication, national interest intervention in social issues, national interest orientation and conflict resolution is something which, to my mind, and I may be mistaken, many, perhaps too many civil society organizations are remiss. In that case, they pick up information, they put it out. All they need to do, and this is what interests their sponsors, is to say that there's something wrong here, and for as long as it can happen. Okay, events began in Borno, and some of them who were renting 6 months, went and rent. Why would you pay rent for 10 years in a conflict area, except that you expect it to continue? So all of that. And then, of course, fake news comes into it. A moment ago, not quite 20 minutes ago, I referred to the boy who hung himself. Now, fact check, even while we're in the studio here, that's the beauty of technology. That information, I got it weeks back. Several people confirmed it. Channels has just done confirmed and referred a fact check with a link showing that it's fake news. But until that came now, I thought it was correct. And you find that challenge also with civil society organizations that have very little spread, but they are making very strong statements about places where they're actually not on ground. That's part of the problem.
Professor Ikechukwu, as we begin to wind down, I know that Malcolm might have one question to ask you, but you said something else earlier about cohesion amongst the youth. But before that, you talked about governance and the institutions of governance. How would that play out in all of these things you talked about, how the non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations even operate within our space. Papa, you want to join that with your question?
Well, and let's load the question. I want to quickly ask, because I'm just thinking of young people. A lot of them were also very disappointed by the process. A lot of them immediately lost faith. You know, and well, let me just say also, maybe also lost patriotism as a result of what happened during the election. So I'm just wondering if it's something that is of concern to you and how it is that we can keep them interested in such a way that they realize that the work is also in their hands, you know, to build a country and make it whatever it is that they choose to make it.
You see, that's where leadership comes in. And that's where, you see, the point to make here is that the young people need knowledge, not just information. And knowledge means understanding how the environment works. They are the ones in the line of fire. There's a lot that needs to happen in their interest. And so you find that the challenge cuts across three major platforms. Number one, who are those mentoring them? What are their reflexes? Many of them are disappointed, but they need to also understand that patriotism does not rest on you getting what you want. No. National interest. Now it's being subverted. You've gone for a particular candidate, it didn't work. You don't give up. You write an exam, you score a B, you write and you do better. So I keep insisting on progressive gains in political education despite the incompetence of the parties. What I see is the progressive upscaling of the consciousness of young people. They are likely to now be a little more patient, but they are seeing their future looking very bleak. And it's not by protesting. So subliminally, people are learning. The crisis I see on the table is where there are no leaders who will be able to tell them, yes, keep going in this direction, don't give up, etc. That way they begin to develop the kind of confidence all of us have with our parents when we're learning to walk. Mm-hmm. But also, and more critically, the youths need to make a distinction between biologically young people and youths. Some are biologically young, but they belong to the old brigade because they are the ones readily available for what is damaging this country. Once they use only biological age, their disadvantage will remain.
Well, let me quickly go to Mr. Adekoke now as we wrap up. I just want to ask you what language you also think the leadership should be speaking. Because some people think that this DSS statement, yes, it is pretty strong. And if, you know, I don't think that they will just come out and say what, you know, what isn't true. But some people have also said they need proof to be able to, you know, take the DSS at his word. Do you think it's also something that needs to be provided to the Nigerian people, especially in a time where trust is becoming quite scarce? Mr. Adekoke, did you hear me?
It is, I believe, what is happening right now in terms of...
no arrest.
Yes, I heard you.
Please go ahead then.
I heard you. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yes, I think there is a network problem. Okay, right. Thank you very much. Now, the process is one that I believe that are to be handled with care. I don't want a situation where the DSS will see this as an opportunity to begin indiscriminate arrests and be bundling people into prisons and what have you. They have to handle this with a lot of maturity. We are already at a stage that we must handle the consciousness of the youth very carefully. Majority of them are ill-informed, just as Prof said. What kind of education do they have about the political process? And they are in the vanguard of the agitation. They are not necessarily in the majority with respect to how the election played out. Mm-hmm. I have had reasons to talk to quite a number of them. And my children, for instance, you know, they were largely misinformed until I sat them down and I educated them. I now refer them to books in my library. I said, look, have you read this? Have you read this particular book? Have you read Awuhon, the Path to Nigerian Freedom and whatever? So I now refer them to a lot of books. I sat them down, educated them properly, and they were like, you know, getting constructed. with respect to some false beliefs that they had initially. They were not asking questions, but we never heard this. I said, yes, I've been mentioning it, but you people refuse to listen. You refuse to read these books. I've been directing you to the libraries. In those days when we were young, there were things we read that made us to be politically conscious. Yes, we organized protests, we organized rallies, we were on the streets, or no, on so many occasions, but they were political interventions that were largely positive.
Mr. Degoke, we're totally out of time. I wish that we could go on and on. Sadly, time is not our friend this morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I hope that the DSS has also listened to you in terms of handling their issues with political maturity. Thank you so much, Mr. Adegoke. He's a senior advocate of Nigeria and principal partner, Kunle Adegoke and Company. We also had with us here Professor Ikechukwu, who is Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. Prof, thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily as well.